In our previous lecture, we examined St. Anselm's argument for the existence of God. This time, we will examine a different form of argument known as the design argument for God's existence. A design argument for God's existence is an argument that seeks to prove that God exists based on the fact that the world has purpose and is designed to fulfill that purpose. Now, there are different kinds of design arguments. For example, St. Thomas Aquinas, who is a medieval theologian in the 13th century, argued that we can know that God exists from the fact that inanimate objects fulfill their purpose and do so by design. But this argument has lost its popularity in our own day, and we'll get into why that is. In the 19th century, another thinker named William Paley came up with a different kind of design argument, though it's not clear whether this is really an argument, and we'll also get into why that is in a bit. I don't mean that disparagingly, however. Rather, Paley does not give us an argument in the sense of premises and conclusion. Instead, he gives an analogy in hopes of helping us to understand the world around us. It's like opening one's eyes to see what's in front of them. We don't give arguments for what we see. Rather, we open our eyes to see what's in front of us. In the same way, Paley thinks we need not to give strict arguments for the existence of God in the sense of premises and conclusion. Rather, we merely need to open the eyes of our understanding to see that God really does exist. Now, admittedly, there is a lot at stake for each and every one of us regarding the successful outcome of design arguments. If the universe is designed by a designer, whom we call God, then the universe has a given purpose. Since we are part of the universe, that means that we too have a given purpose. Our own lives have meaning that is already out there, meaning we have to just discover. The fact that we seek for purpose and seek happiness is then by design. We were made to fulfill our purpose and to discover and live out the happy life. But if the universe is not designed by a designer, or if the universe is an outcome of chance, then it's not clear whether we really do have a purpose. If we do not have a purpose, then we either have to live without purpose, or we have to figure out whether we can create our own purpose and make meaning out of the world we live in. In short, we are not looking at design arguments as spectators who watch a basketball game. We are not spectators, but players. The fact that we exist and the fact that we are living in the world means that we already have skin in the game. The question for us then is not whether we will play the game of life. We are already playing. The question is, given the fact that either the world is created with design by God or not, what are we placing our bet in, so to speak? In a casino, we wager chips, but in philosophy, we wager our own lives. In order to give the argument and its objections justice, we will look into why the modern world shifted away from St. Thomas Aquinas' argument for the existence of God and gravitated towards Paley's. We will then note some of the difficulties, though not necessarily refutations, as that will be up for you to decide. So we'll note some of the difficulties that Paley's argument faces in the way he states his argument. Finally, since philosophy aims at interpretive charity, we will try to offer the strongest design argument given today's day and age, and see whether such an argument can stand against scrutiny. Prior to looking at the argument itself, it would be helpful for us to consider why we are looking at Paley's argument specifically, and not other design arguments like that of St. Thomas, whom we mentioned earlier. In a previous lecture, we discussed that the way we see the world, a worldview, is comprised of three things: a metaphysic, which is our view of what reality is; an epistemology, which is how we know what we know; and a set of ethics, how we are to live our lives. The design argument of St. Thomas and of the medieval world is a very kind of sophisticated argument, but we don't share the same worldview as the medievals. Our account of reality, knowledge, and the way we live are very different. For example, the medievals believed that things have a purpose in themselves and that we can know the purpose of things. But our modern world no longer believes this, or at least we find this view to be very controversial. Our current day and age is shaped by a historical movement known as the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment differs from all other moments in history because it was during this period that science as we know it began to take off. You may have heard of the name Francis Bacon from your maybe some previous science classes or from watching previous videos. And if not, that's okay. We'll learn more about him in future lectures. But just to put it briefly, Francis Bacon was the 17th century thinker who developed the scientific method. The scientific method is very useful. Without modern science as we know it, we wouldn't have, say, medical advancements or technology. So given these great advancements, the world began to view the whole universe as a kind of machine. A machine has many parts, all working together for some whole. For example, the computer that we're using right here has many different components. Without the different parts working together, the computer cannot run. The computer is designed in such a way that all the parts work together. Enlightenment thinkers thought this to be the case with the world. If the world is like a machine, as they believed, then the different parts of the world must all work together by design. The fact that the planets all orbit the sun in an orderly fashion suggests design. Again, trees emit oxygen and require carbon dioxide to live, while human beings require oxygen and emit carbon dioxide. The human being and the tree are both parts of the world that make living conditions for each other possible. This was the kind of world that William Paley lived in, a world that understood the universe as a machine. So it is within this context that we should try to understand Paley. When we suppose that the world is like a machine, as the Enlightenment thinkers did, then Paley's argument shows its full force. Suppose you were walking on the beach all alone. As you walk, you find a watch on the ground. You pick up the watch, open it, and look at its parts. You see that the parts of the watch all work together in an orderly fashion. Now here's the question. When you see the watch, open it, and examine it, do you think that this watch just randomly appeared? Did the ocean just magically create a watch? Or was this watch designed by someone? Naturally, we will think that the watch was designed by somebody. But not just anyone, of course. The watch has design. To make something with design requires intelligence and intention. So the designer of the watch is not just some random force. Rather, the designer must be somebody with intelligence and intention. It must be made by a rational person. Now here's the key move of Paley. The world is like the watch. All the different parts of the world work together. Planets orbit in an orderly fashion. The food chain is orderly, right? Prey tend to have their eyes on the sides of their heads so that they can see around them and avoid predators. Predators, on the other hand, have their eyes closer together so they can focus on finding their prey. Again, animals create waste. Waste creates soil. Soil provides the conditions for plants to grow. And plants provide food, and animals eat the food provided by the plants. The whole ecosystem, then, is like a machine. Every part works together for the whole ecosystem to function. The world is like one giant watch. Now, here's the thing. We would naturally say that the complexity of the watch requires an intelligent and intentional designer. A watch doesn't just poof out of nowhere. If the world is like one giant watch, then the world too requires an intelligent and intentional designer. Again, this designer is not just some random force, because forces are not intelligent nor intentional. To be intelligent and intentional requires a mind. So the designer of the world must be a rational designer, one who knows and understands the way the world works. So in a nutshell, Paley's argument is this. The world is like a watch. Just as a watch has different intricate parts that all work together by design and therefore imply a designer, the world has many different intricate parts that all work together by design and therefore requires an intelligent, rational designer. And it is this rational designer whom we call God. Interestingly, Paley's argument was once held and championed by many. But this is no longer the case in our own day and age. So we have to ask, what happened? What happened was a shift in worldview. Paley's argument seems very intuitive and true if we think that the world is a kind of machine. But new strands of thought in politics and science completely changed the way people saw the world. We call this a paradigm shift, a complete shift in worldview. We see this most clearly in science. Charles Darwin is the scientist who came up with the theory of evolution. He offered scientific evidence for the view that the world is not a machine. Rather, the world is something that constantly changes for the sake of preserving life. To use Darwin's language, different organisms struggle to preserve their existence as a species. Earlier, I gave the example of predator and prey. Paley will tell us that the placement of the eyes for both is due to God's design. Darwin, however, will have us think that the eye placement evolved over many, many years because it helped each species survive. The eyes of a predator are placed the way that they are because that placement is optimal for finding prey. The eyes of prey, on the other hand, are placed the way they are because that placement is optimal for avoiding predators. In this view, you do not need God to explain the way the world works. You only need the evolutionary principle that every species struggles to preserve its own existence. This struggle, of course, causes conflict and competition among species, which is why some species die off while others thrive. So if the world were made by design, Paley might say, then there would be no reason for species to go extinct. It would be like saying a watch no longer needs some of its parts. It is this view, this evolutionary view, that has been popularized in our own day. As understood through Darwin, the theory of evolution provides a scientific account that does not explicitly require God. Darwin's evolutionary account of nature, then, has at least historically provided a stumbling block to the design argument for God. But for us, in our study of philosophy, a question should arise. Is the Darwinian worldview of our own day the last worldview shift? How do we know that there won't be another paradigm or worldview shift which makes us think that the design argument is a good argument for God's existence? What we are in search for is a design argument that holds good not just for one worldview, but in every possible worldview. But we have to ask, is such an argument possible? The 21st century philosopher Peter Kreeft seems to hint at a different kind of argument, one that does not depend on whether we see the world as medieval, mechanistic, or evolutionary. we can put the argument like this. Our first premise is simple. Either the world was designed by a designer, or it is not. It is a byproduct of chance. Let us step into each worldview and see what follows. Let us suppose that the world is a product of evolutionary chance. If the world is a product of chance, then we are products of chance. And if we are products of chance, then our minds, our reasoning processes, are also products of chance. Now, what does evolution aim at? Evolution does not aim at truth, or if it does, it only does so incidentally. Evolution aims at survival. It preserves traits that help a species survive, and it eliminates traits that do not. So under this view, our reasoning abilities evolved not to know what is true, but to help us stay alive. And so here's the key move. If our reasoning is aimed at survival rather than truth, then we have no reason to trust our reasoning. I'll say that again because that's important. If our reasoning is aimed at survival rather than truth, then we have no reason to trust our reasoning. But notice what we are doing right now. We are thinking. We are reasoning. We are philosophizing. We are asking whether God exists. But this question has nothing to do with survival. We do not philosophize in order to stay alive. In fact, it was philosophy that got Socrates killed. Rather, we philosophize because we want to know what is true. But if our minds are the product of evolutionary chance, then our minds are not aimed at truth. And if our minds are not aimed at truth, then we cannot trust our reasoning, including the reasoning that led us to believe that we are products of evolutionary chance. In other words, if we believe that we exist through evolutionary chance, then we cannot trust the very belief that we exist through evolutionary chance. This worldview collapses on itself. What this shows us is that if we take the view that we exist through evolutionary chance, then we have no reason to argue about anything. We have no reason to take any philosophical view. In short, we have no reason to philosophize. But the fact that we do philosophize, the fact that we hunger for truth, shows that our minds cannot be aimed at mere survival. Just as food nourishes the body, truth nourishes the mind. That is why we ask questions. Genuine questioning is like the hunger pains of the mind. We ask questions to satisfy our desire to know, just as we eat food to satisfy our appetites. For this reason, we cannot exist by mere evolutionary chance. If we did, we would contradict ourselves. Instead, our minds must be designed. Our minds are designed to search for the truth. And if our minds are designed to search for the truth, then there must be a rational designer. And this rational designer is whom we call God. Now, under this argument, it is possible that evolution was the way this God designed the world. That is at least possible. So the argument here is not saying that evolution itself is wrong. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that evolution itself is wrong. Rather, we're saying something different. We are saying that an unguided evolutionary process leads to contradiction. An unguided evolutionary process leads to contradiction. So this is where the design argument leaves us today. The theist, the one who believes that God exists, wants us to think that if we trust our reason, then we must trust in the one who designed our reasoning. The very fact that we ask questions and the very fact that we have a desire to know things means that our minds are ordered toward truth. But do we all know the truth? Or are we searching for the truth? Of course, we are searching for the truth. We don't know the full truth yet. But if our minds are designed to search for the truth, then the designer must know what the truth is. The designer then cannot be some mere man. The designer must be one who knows all truth. The designer must be an omniscient God. So, what does this all mean for us? Earlier, I mentioned how we are not mere bystanders examining arguments for God's existence. Rather, we are participants in the game of life. Our wager on whether God exists is not made with chips, but with something infinitely more valuable: ourselves. This is an important bet, then, one that we cannot take lightly. The question we must all ask ourselves is not whether we will wager on the existence of God, but how we will wager. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you.